do you want to give us a quick overview, Thomas, of what you're proposing and like what the problems you're seeing at the moment?
Okay, so the problem that we have now is with the general architecture of the API security that we have. And in fact, we have three different problems because we have three different authentications that we are working with. The first one is how to register the runner, because this uses one mechanism. The second one is how the runner is talking with GitLab for, let's name it, initial request, where the main one is asking for a new job, and this uses a separate mechanism. And the third one is how we authenticate in GitLab in the scope, in the context of the job. So with this issue, I tried to get in one place all of the problems and all of the ideas that we discussed in the past. So let's maybe go through each of these three scopes and talk about what is the problem and how we could resolve it. So the first one, the initial communication that we are doing is registering the runner. And for now, we do this with one long-living, not easily rotatable token. This token is also not easy to be discovered for any automation that you would like to use. So for example, if you want to create a farm of runners with Kubernetes, then no matter if you want to use a Helm chart or if you want to do it by hand, you need to go to your GitLab instance. You need to find a group project or the instance that you want to create a runner for. You need to copy the registration token. And then you need to hardcode it to your automation. No matter what we will use, at some moment we will have a credential that needs to be stored somewhere if things need to do work automatically. But with the current approach, we have the problem that this token is too powerful. Like, if I would like now to create a shared runner for GitLab.com, I would need to get admin access and get this token. Then if Steve would like to create a separate infrastructure also used as shared runners for GitLab.com, he would also need to get this token. And then Pedro, and then Luke, and then Darren, and 5 of us would have this token. Now, each of us at any moment can leave the company, and not necessarily with good intentions after it. Each of us can by mistake leak this token, even not knowing about this. So having one token, it's way too easy. It's way too risky to leave it like that, because the possibility that someone will use it with bad intention, or that someone will mistakenly reveal it, it's big. The more people have the secret, the less secure the secret is. The second problem is that, let's say I'm now leaving the company and someone decides, okay, Tomasz had access to this token, he now left the company. It's best to rotate this token because he can do anything with this. He could notate it on the piece of paper and now can get access to any project on GitLab.com. So someone gets into the UI and clicks the rotate button. It's simple. And all 4 of you have now the problem, because all 4 of you in your automations are still using this token. Things start to failing. You need to dig up each one separately. Why it started to failing? Because someone somewhere in the process that we probably have already documented in the in the termination issues, just does this rotation if someone with admin access leaves. And then each of you separately need to debug this, need to fix this, need to gather a new token, and it will work until another case like that will happen. And in the past we were talking with Kamil about how we could resolve this, and there were basically two ideas. One idea was to just stop using the registration token and switch to the personal access one, which I think is the easiest way, because we don't change as much the registration procedure. So the users still will do mostly what they are learned to do. They will just need to first change the token that they are using, not use a registration token because there is no one at this moment, but use their own private access token. And in the registration, we would need to specify what kind of runner connected to which resource we want to register, because then now the registration token, it's not only authentication mechanism, it's also the identification mechanism. When we authenticate the registration request, we know if this was a token for the instance, if this was the token for the group number 1 or a project number 15. With private access token, we know who wants to register the runner. We know what permission the person has. We have no idea in which scope the runner should be created. So then we need to add this to the registration. But I think it's even better, because then you don't need to search for the token in the project settings, CI/CD, and this exposable panel that you need to find. But you just need to have a project ID, a group ID, something that you can note once when you create the project or group, something that you probably already use if you want to automate several tasks. So we need to specify that you want to have an instance runner or a group runner with ID, or a project runner with ID. And then we authenticate this as any other API request using the personal access token. If now, let's say Pedro would like to try to register an instance runner for GitLab.com with his personal access token from his normal account that is not admin one, the response would be no. And with this, we can then create automation accounts on GitLab instance, automation accounts for the groups, for the projects. We can separate accounts for separate needs. And going back to the initial example, if 5 of us need to start managing a fleet of shared runners, 5 separate fleets of shared runners, each of us would use the same personal access token. If I'm leaving the company, my token is terminated, or even not terminated. My admin access is terminated. For example, if I would not have a separate admin access, but my normal account would be an admin account, someone would just disable the admin flag. And now the part that I automated starts to fail, but all 4 of yours are still working. The second idea that we were discussing with Kamil that would also work was that we also dropped the idea of the registration token, and we dropped the idea of registration from the runner side itself. We do the registration in GitLab with the UI or with the API. We, let's say in a very, very, very simple description, we go to the project settings CI/CD runner, we click a register runner button, and then we start filling details, what executor we want to use, what settings it should have, all the things that we normally now do in the registration command. And after we click save, the runner entry is created, like it was now with the registration command, and we are getting back content that should be placed in the config.tom file, which is also open for automation, because we would need to add just an API endpoint for something like that. With this config.tom part, we get all of the details, like what is the name of the runner, what is the limit, what is the executor, the specific settings for the executor, or the basic settings that we want to support, and then the rest you need to configure by yourself, and the token. I'm not covering now the runner token itself. We'll skip to this in a moment. What is the advantage of this? We don't need to track the registration on the runner side. We just care about having a valid config.tom file, and we can provide the user, especially the less technical users, with a nice graphical GUI to prepare the configuration of the runner. The disadvantage is that it's harder to automate, because then we need to prepare the API. We need to cover things that normally would happen internally in Runner, where we have all of the structs and the mechanisms. We would need to replicate on the GitLab Rails side to just have this API and this UI to produce the final configuration. So probably a little easier for the user to use, especially the less technical one, but harder to maintain. But each of these two options say that we just drop the registration token. It's not needed. It's really not needed. It's just left over from the very old days of GitLab CI. And in my issue, I proposed to go with the PIT approach, because it would be simpler to implement right now. We would need to little tweak the registration API, and nothing more would change. We would still work as we work now. Okay, so I think this is the all of background that I could give for this part. So do we want to discuss this part now, or do we want to cover everything and then start a big discussion about everything?
I think it's better if we go section by section, so we don't do a lot of context switching. I have a few questions. So first of all, I really like the idea of using a PAT, like for all the benefits you said. Like it's much easier to like invalidate a PAT token for some specific person and things like that, and we get the roles out of the box. My biggest concern with PAT, using a PAT token, would be would we want to introduce a new scope in the PAT? Because like if we use the API scope, right, that means if this token gets leaked, that's even more dangerous than the registration token now, because now they would have read and write access to everything, not just the code. Because at the moment we cannot scope it to like write API or read API. And the second one, like the second option you mentioned about like removing the registration, I see it that as a normal evolution of using the PAT token, right? Because if we implement the UI, or if we implement remove the registration, we still have to generate the config.toml file, for example. And GitLab Runner will just use the PAT token, like GitLab Runner, like GitLab Runner new, for example, instead of register, right? It will talk over to the API with the PAT token. So it seems like a normal evolution than a different solution to me. But yeah, my biggest concern would be scope, like the scopes of the PAT tokens. And it will make the registrations a bit harder, because it's just another flag the user has to specify, right? And also, like right now, for me to get the registration token, I go into the CI/CD settings, right? From a UX perspective now, like I go into the CI/CD sections, it tells me that I have to go generate a token. Now I have to go to a separate panel, generate a token, come back to that, and like there's some context switching going on that, unless we make it in the UI that you can generate a path token for the runner scope inside of the CI/CD settings.
Yeah, like the last idea, it's just a UX improvement that we could make. Like, I expect that if you are the paranoid administrator that cares about the security and wants to have everything tracked with the separate token, you probably already each day create a new path for something else. And with the runner registration left as it is now, but with the registration token replaced with path and the two new values that you would need to specify, there's not really much context switching, because first of all, you can reuse a path that you already have for run registration. You can use 1Password or KeePass or whatever you use for yourself to just create it once and have one token for registry, one token for API interaction, and one token for registering the neurons. If you want to have each automation for runner registrations with a unique token, then you need to go and do it uniquely. So yes, this would be one more thing that you need to do. But we can improve this in the future with create a new token button in the settings. Like, if we will go this direction, you will even don't need to look in the CI/CD settings, because you don't need anything from this site. Now you need to look there because there is the registration token. And with the new approach, you would rather need to look on the main page of the project or main page of the group, because this is a place where you have the ID. And this would be needed to say register runner type group ID 1, 2, 3, 4. The second approach, yeah, I agree that it would be evolution of the path approach, but it's also moving some responsibilities from runner to Rails. So we would need to, for example, track how the config structure is made in both places. So it's a way bigger change than only start using path. The path would be a requirement if you would like to go this direction. I'm not sure if this is the direction that we should choose, because then we need to duplicate the code, and this is what we now want to revert in the GitLab exec. GitLab Runner exec. Like, now we have the incomplete parser on the GitLab Runner side, and we don't have time and possibilities to track all of the changes that we made in GitLab CI YAM file. And we want to start pushing GitLab Runner exec through Rails to just have this in one place. And this is what we should not, this is the mistake that we should not repeat, in my opinion, with the registration. If we want to generate the config structure, we should do it on the runner side, because there we have the internals. If anything will change, it will change there. And then we need to remember that we also need to change this in Rails, which is one more thing that can break. As for the scope, I fully agree. This is a really, really good idea. I was not covering this. I was thinking initially to just start using the API one. But we should think about introducing new scope, and I don't think it would be hard to implement it. I don't know how it is done now, but I assume that we would have a possibility to define on the API endpoint that the token, if it's used, should have some specific scope. And I really don't think this will be hard. And yeah, this is definitely a good idea.
Yeah. So I have no other objections. To be honest, it makes sense. Um, unless Darren or Petra have any other questions or objections.
No,
I think.
as I was reading in the document, I also agreed, and I thought about the same thing of adding a scope for this. I assumed that that's what we were going to do. So yeah, no discussion from this. I just think it's makes total sense to get rid of, you know, an entity type that we don't really need. This our registration token is basically duplicating the work already of the PAT, so we should just use the PAT, which is much better supported already by the rest of the infrastructure. So yeah, we can move on.
Now I have two questions. I think I was kind of distracted a second ago, and maybe we covered it. So, and Steve, in the document, you said you like the idea of using the person access token. Seems reasonable to me as well. I missed if we discussed in detail about whether or not using the PAT makes registration easier or simpler for users. And if we go to PAT, can we, is it simpler for us to automate, configuring and registering a runner? And maybe we talked about that already. That's my first question.
Like, it will be a little more complicated and a little simple depending what kind of the user you are. If you are a user that doesn't create a personal access token for any new integration that you would like to do, but you just use everything, then one token for everything, then if we will introduce a scope that is required, then you would need to go for the first time to your project setting, to your account settings and create a new token, and then go back to the project or group to get the ID. So this is one thing more that you would need to do, because now you just go to the project settings, CI/CD, you copy the token and everything is covered. If you're already someone who creates a separate token for any new integration that is made, then this would be your normal workflow. And I don't think that any security person that prefers to have separate tokens for each integration would complain about the need to switching back to another place where the token will be generated. And Steve already proposed that in the future we could expose a shortcut in the CI/CD settings. So in the place where we now have the registration token, we could provide one button, create for me a path with runner registration scope only, and let's say by default not expired at all, and it would print you the token value in some model, and in the background it would save it just like you would go to the account settings, tokens, create new token, and do all of the steps that you would do normally. So this is just an improvement that we could iterate on after changing the API authentication method.
So basically, it will add more friction for initial users, but it will add more flexibility and security to administrators. So when like GitLab is adopted by your organization, it will be easier to rotate tokens and things like that. But we can improve this friction, like what we're doing right now, Darren, with the frictionless runner or whatever we're gonna call it, right? Make it easier for self-hosted. We said that we're gonna give the command to the user to run on his laptop, and that will have the registration token and all that. We can mimic the same thing as what Thomas just said. Instead of putting the registration token, we generate a PAT token that even, for example, expires after 5 minutes, right? So the user has 5 minutes to run the command, and that PAT token is no longer valid. If they want something to be automated, so for Kubernetes to like spawn new runners all the time, they go in and generate a token that never expires or expires after your whatever. Because like with PAT tokens, we get the benefits of expiry dates, right? Because we can expire PAT tokens and things like that.
Yeah, one thing that we'll need to remember about is the Kubernetes integration and the managed labs. Now it uses the project registration token to register the runner. We would need to update this to create path in the background, or yeah, should we do this in the context of the user who created who clicked the install button? Probably yes, just like we do with the ownership of who started the job.
I have two follow-on questions. Hopefully I can keep it really simple. Maybe the first one, and it's two, the first one is actually a two-parter. Like, when do we want to start like iterating on this? And like, how fast can we actually iterate till we actually have something we can touch and start playing around with? And then, are you guys imagining that in terms of us dog fooding this, would we be looking to maybe set up like a separate GitLab instance where we are dog fooding this in like in a kind of its own environment, kind of away from everything else, to make sure we work through all different use cases? And you know,
I was thinking on doing, like, we must do this in backward compatible way, and we can't remove the registration token before 14.0. If we will do this, if we will start this now in the 13x line, because this would be a backward incompatible change. So what we would need to do is, first, we would need to extend API on the GitLab side. Like, first, we would need to introduce the new scope and allow the path to get this new scope. Then we would need to extend the API that we use for Runner. There are three. I'm sorry. There's one endpoint that would use it to check if this is a path or if this is a registration token. If this is a path, then we check it, authenticate in one way. If this is a registration token, in the second way. And the third change would be update the runner. And here, I think we could not care about the old behavior. Or we could make it also backward compatible. So on the command line, you decide which way you want to use. Like, if you want to use path, then you have two required, I'm sorry, three with the URL, three required flags that you need to use and fourth optional. And with registration token, you have two required, like URL and registration token. And here we would have URL, path, runner type, and optional ID of the project or of the group. And with this, we would not need to have any sandbox. We could start shipping this with GitLab.com. Because the goal is that we have both ways working. So our customers can still use registration token approach to create their runners. And we can start testing how the path approach works for us. And then just at some moment, we need to mention, okay, we have this, the old way is deprecated, and we will remove it with 14.0. And then with 14.0, the breaking change happen, and whoever wants to use new runners on GitLab.com must update the runner, which is a nice side effect of this thing. Steve, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I don't even think we have to specify what type of runner it is. If, like, for example, the ID, we make it like project/ID or group/ID.
Yeah,
we can
merge the two.
Yeah, we can.
Yeah,
but those are implementation details.
Yeah, exactly. Like, we just need to provide this information. We need to provide the type, this is required, and the ID is optional because, for instance, you don't have an ID.
Yeah.
And for group project, it would be. But if we'll make it two flags, or if we'll make this value to be type/ID, it's a detail. It's a detail. We can choose whatever seems to be the easiest when we start implementing the change on the runner side. Because in the API, we can have it as two fields, and then on the runner side, we can decide what is easier for us.
Yeah, I would say UX would be more important than it is right now overall, because it's going to be a bit more complicated. Like the user has to generate the path token. The user has to figure out the project ID, which at the moment, the current UI is not very clear where to get the project ID, unless you're a big user of GitLab. So like it's like UX becomes more important if we go ahead with this, because there's more pieces together, but we get the benefits of administration and security.
Yeah, but with the idea of generating the path with the button, we can also, like what we have with the container registry. You can learn from the documentation how the image definition is made, or you can go to the container registry, find the image and click the copy button. And this is what we would provide. At the initial step, we would just provide in this place how the command looks. And here we can put the project ID if this is a project runner, for example, because we know it already. And then we can add the button for generating path and auto-generate a command for the specific path, and then another snippet how to do it with Helm chart, another how to do it with, I don't know, Chef or whatever we would like to support from this place. Initially, we just need to, at the place where we now have the registration token, we need to leave a note that you need to have a path, a note to the documentation how to generate it until we will have the one click button, and a command that you can just copy, put into your terminal, fill with the path, and click enter.
Yeah, so the reason I'm saying this is what I'm inclining to do is, like, for example, we already have this idea that you just copy one command and register the runner, right? So maybe that would be the first step to do. And then when we implement that, we implement the path stuff, and then we update that UI to include the path inside of it. That's what I mean. Like, I'm thinking sequencing, like how we sequence the work.
Yeah, if we already work somewhere on having such copyable command, then for sure, if we will have it when we will start working with path, then we have everything that we need.
Yeah.
We just need to auto-generate this path for the user when he asks for a new command to execute. Okay, are there any other questions related to the registration API? Okay, so the second one is the runner token, and this is the biggest problem that I see now. And Steve, I saw before going out, I saw your comments in the issue. But maybe let's start with describing again what is the problem. Like when you registered the runner, GitLab generates a unique token for this specific runner entry. This token is saved in the database and it's sent back with the response for the registration request. And it's saved in runner's config.tom file. And as with the registration token, the runner token has two goals to achieve. First, it's an authentication method, because runner somehow needs to prove that it's authorized to request a new job, or to unregister itself, or to check if it still exists in the database. The second one is that this token is used to find out what kind of runner it is and to which resource it is connected. So when the runner asks for a new job, it hits one endpoint, that is one for all runners using, for example, gitlab.com. It sends this unique runner token, and then GitLab first checks if the token exists in the database. If it exists, then the request is authenticated. and we can find out which runner uses it. So then we can find out that this is, for example, a shared runner or a project runner specific for the GitLab Runner project and added to few more. What are the problems of this? The biggest problem of this token is that having this token, I can access every project for which such runner would be applicable. So if I would somehow get my hands on a runner token from one of our shared runners, I could try to impersonate, if we can say about impersonation, in this case, a shared runner and try to access try to access a project, any project on GitLab.com that has the shared runners enabled. It's not as easy because the scheduling happens on the GitLab side. So if I'm targeting a specific project, I would need to try it over and over again until I would hit this one. But at some moment, I can get a job scheduled for the project that I'm looking for. And with this, I can then use the job token that we'll cover in the last section to access the project repository, project API, related projects, basically do anything that the person who started this project is able to do in GitLab. And this is what makes this token really dangerous. It's even less rotatable than the registration token because there is no way how you could rotate this from the runner, from the GitLab side. In the past, we had this token printed, but only printed in the runner details page. It was removed 2.5 years ago, I think. And with the 13.0, it will be removed from the API. Because now you can use the API to list all runners that you have access to, and you will get the runner token value. And here we touch the comment that you Steve left in the issue, like this token is already encrypted. It's true. It's true. This token is encrypted, and as a regular user of GitLab.com, there is no way how you could easily get access to a random runners token. You would need to break all securities and get access to the database, which itself is a way bigger problem than the fact that you have this one token in your hand. But what about people that have access? And let's look on me. I have still my admin account on GitLab.com. I have still access to the database and to the Rails console because from time to time I'm doing something with this. And we constantly review if user access to the console, to the admin account is still needed. If not, we are revoking it. We trust the people who have access to this, but people are only people, and it's not uncommon problem in the IT industry where someone who was trusted had access to secrets, at some moment just split it with the organization and split it in a very bad way. And now the person that we trusted now tries to do everything it can to affect us. And I could now log into Rails console and get a runner token of any random runner from the few thousand, 10,000 that we have on GitLab.com. And with this, I could try to do what I described it before. So try to use this token to abuse the scheduling API to get access to a project that I would be not applicable to. Of course, I can use my admin account to already log into GitLab and see the repository, for example. But with the runner token, I could do this even when someone will terminate my admin account. And the problem with this token stored in database is that it's not needed there. It's totally not needed there because there is nothing but the runner that needs to know this token. The token is provided only to support three things. The runner wants to call verify endpoint to see if the entry in the database is still existing. And this is something that we want to execute from the runner machine. The second endpoint is unregistration. So I have a runner. I know that at this moment, it will be never needed again. I'm removing the machine. I have my computer and I'm throwing it to the garbage. So I want to unregister this runner from every project, every group. I don't care what kind of runner it was on the GitLab instances. I have a list of runner sections registered to several GitLab instances, and I want to unregister this runner so it will be not wasting a space in the database and trying to say that there is a runner that doesn't exist physically anymore. This is also an operation that happens from the runner machine. The third option is I'm asking for a new job, which also happens from the runner machine. There is no other place where this runner is used. There is no other place when we would like this token to be used, only when the runner machine starts some request. And currently, we have this token also stored in the database. We even worse, we provide it with the API, so you can try to discover it. So if Steve, if you would not have access to our runners, to the physical machines, but you would have a maintainer access to GitLab Runner project, you could get this token. Even if we decided that you are not allowed to manage the machine because we have 2 people, it's enough, we trust them, we want to limit the people that have access to this secret as much as we can. So we need to have some way to be able to authenticate the runner, to identify it, but to have this secret stored only on the runner side. And by the way, I started this issue after a discussion in a security report from HackerOne for exactly such case. Like now you can register a project runner, and then you can share this runner with several other projects. If you will assign the project specific runner to at least one more project, you are unable to remove this runner from the UI because you don't know who else relies on it. What you can do is you can unconnect it from your project where you don't need it. And when you unconnect it from all of the projects and only the one last will be sent, will be left, the disable for project button changes back to remove the run. We did the same in the API. So you have the user API that allows you to manage the runners. And if you have a project runner assigned to at least 2 projects, and you try to delete this runner with this API, it will return to you with an error that this runner is assigned to more than 1 project. Please unassign it from other projects, then you will be able to remove it. But if you have this runner token, you can use the runner unregister API to remove it. And this is what the reporter found to be a security vulnerability, because we don't want a regular maintainer to be able to remove a runner from all of the projects where it could be used, but we still allow it because the API is known and the maintainer can access this token while it can not have the access to the runner machine itself. And this is the main problem that I wanted to point here. And what we are looking on here is the same class of problems that we have, for example, with SSH, that we have with Chef Knife. And this is why I propose to use the public-private key pair, because this is basically what is the standard. This is how you, for example, use SSH. You generate a key pair where the private key is known only for you. It's on your machine or your YubiKey or however you want to store it. And this is something that you keep very secret. You don't share it with anyone. And then you have a public key that can be even wrote explicitly on your web page. You can share it with Twitter. You can print it on your building where you live. You don't need to care about this because the asymmetric cryptography promises us that you can do whatever you want with the public key. If someone will get his hands on the public key, it's not a security problem because this key can't be used for authenticating. It can be used only to prove that you own the private key. And the proposal that I have so that during registration is not GitLab that generates the token, but Runner that generates the key pair, stores the private key in the config file, and then sends the public key with the registration request. It's exactly what we do now, for example, with SSH. If you have SSH access to some server with a password and you want to start using the keys because it's more secure, you generate a key pair on your laptop, and then you use SSH copy ID to send the public key to the remote server using your password to authenticate, and then the remote server saves the public key. After this, you can authenticate to it without using the password at all. The key pair is all that we need. So together with path, with the path, we now on the runner side generate the key pair. We authenticate to the registration API with the path, with the scope that we talked about, with checking the permissions that we talked about. And when sending the registration request, now we send information, what tags we want to set, if it's spoused or not, if it should run untagged jobs or not. We add one more field, the public key. And this public key is saved in the database. And now if I will use API or I will breach the database, I will get my hands on this public key. It doesn't give me any power, because the private key is on the runner machine, and only the person who has access to this runner machine can access this private key. And again, of course, someone can breach the machine of the runner, but then we have a bigger problem. Like, this is why we have accounts, this is why we have sudo, this is why we use file permissions to limit possible access to it. But if someone will get the hands on the config.tom file, then we don't need to think about the key, because we have way bigger problem that someone breached our infrastructure. This idea also makes the rotation much easier. And again, it works like with the SSH. If I would like now to switch my SSH key, I would generate a new one, send it to all of the servers that I'm using my old key to authenticate and allow me to save a new public key on the remote server, and then drop my private key, old one, from my machine. And then I start authenticating with the new key, which was saved on the remote server. And this is what I propose here, just that we don't have multiple public keys stored remotely, just the last one that should be used. So then we can, if we decide that it's time for rotation because an administrator left the organization and we want to be sure that no credentials that he knows are still in use, we just call GitLab Runner rotate keys. It iterates like now the verification or unregister. It iterates over all runner sections, connects with the remote GitLab, generates a new key pair, updates the public key on the remote. We can add a second step to verify that the key was properly serviced and can be used, and we drop the last one. And with the rotation make like that, we can even put this in Chrome. And make it rotated each day at midnight. So then no one will be able to use and abuse the token because it will be quickly removed. Okay, lot of talking. This is the problem. This is the solutions that I propose. Now I'm open for any comments, any questions that you have.
I have some questions, mostly because I'm not familiar with the private public key details, but like if I change my private key, the public key would not be verifiable anymore, right?
Yes.
Okay. And you cannot verify the public key without the private key, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, the key pair works like you have two. It's a big mathematic with some huge primes. Yeah, so you have two big numbers and two other big numbers, and then the operation works more or less like hashing. Like if you have one part of the key, then you can do something with this. With the other part of the key, you can do something with this, and if the keys are compatible, this will match. If the keys are not compatible, it will say you that the keys are not matching. But having any of these keys, you can't recreate the second one. And the public private is just a concept because internally they are more or less the same. There is a little difference, but the clue here is that you can possibly share each of them, and having this one key, you will be unable to create the second one, and without having both of them, you can't prove that you own this identity. And the difference is useful only in the case when we want to use encryption and signing, because in case of encryption, one of the keys is public, so the one that we share with anyone, and the second one is private. And the public is used to create encoded message. The private is used to verify that this is true. If you want to use signing, we just switch the keys. So I have the one that encodes the message, and everyone can have the one that proves that the message was encoded by the private one. So this is why you should not use the same key for both signing and encoding and encrypting. But in this case, we just care about that the runner have the private key until this private key will not leave this machine. You can do anything you want with the public key, and it will not allow you to use another machine and authenticate on this as this user, as this runner, because you need to own the private key, and you're unable to recreate the private key from the public. And of course, if you lose one of them, the second one becomes unusable. It's only that usually when you store the RSA private key, you in fact store both. So you can get again the public one and restore it. But on the public side, you store only the public one and nothing else.
Okay, a few more questions. So right now we use the runner token to identify the runner, right? As well, like
yes.
Hey, I'm runner ABC. Give me a job. How would we do that identification with the public key? Is it like a signed message or like?
There are two possibilities. Like we need to do signature because this is how we can use the keys to authenticate the ownership. So the easiest way would be to get the JSON encoded request that we have for part of the message, and basically do what the JWT does. It gets the message, encodes it to base 64, sign it again, encodes or without the first one. Anyway, we have a message that is sent open to the GitLab. We sign this message with our private key, and we send this signature to GitLab. And then GitLab checks if the signature made on this message that was open is valid, and if it was made by the public, by the private key, which is a pair of the public key that we have on our side. In both Go and Ruby, you have 2-3 commands in line that you need to execute, and this will work. So for handling the authentication part, we need to do signing. Now, the runner token now have also the second scope. It's used for identify which runner was making the request. And with the private public key, we have two possibilities here. First one is that during registration, we could get the ID, the database ID in the response and store it in the config file. And then we could send this ID with the request. The ID will say which runner it is, and the private key will prove that it's not false. This has this advantage that we have the key, the ID available on the runner side, which is, for example, what Dells want to have. And for example, I can point you later to an issue where Brett from Dell, he is now using the runner token to join information from GitLab and from the runner, like runner metrics and some GitLab stuff. And the first 8 characters from the runner token, it's the only thing that tells him how this connects. So now when we plan to remove the token from the API on the GitLab side, he is very upset because he will be unable to easily join things because he has no information about the runner ID on the runner side. And he already opened an issue to just pass this ID if we want to remove the API because they needed to do some fancy stuff that they do. And we could easily use this for identification. The second option is how, for example, SSH works. Like each key has a unique fingerprint calculated with MD5, SHA 256, or whichever hash method we'll use. And with the private, with the message that we sent, with the signature, we also sent information about what is the fingerprint of the public key that we are using. This is what SSH do. The communication is signed with the key, but openly we send the fingerprint of the used key, and then the SSH server looks through the out keys file, through all of the public keys that are applicable for this user, and tries to match which one has this fingerprint. When it matches, it takes the public key and tries to verify the message. If it matches, everything works, and we know which key was used. And this is what we could do also on our side. We could send the payload, the signature, and the information about the key fingerprint that we want to use. To make it secure, it should be part of the signed message. And then on GitLab side, we read the message, from the message, we first verify if the signature is valid. If it's valid, from the message, we get the fingerprint. We go through the database, search for the runner that uses this fingerprint for the public key, and then we use the public key to check if the signature was made with the proper private key. With this, we have what we have now with the runner token. So we verified that the runner was authorized to do this request, and we know which runner entry into the database it was. I personally would go with the ID because it would be useful for the user, and it would be way easier to query the database with the primary key of the runner entry. And we still have this secured by the public-private key algorithm. However, if someone will force us to use the fingerprints, it will also work. It will be just a little bit slower to query the database.
Yeah, I agree with using like a signing key, like moving the trust to the runner. Like, hey, I'm actually the person that I am. I'm the actual runner that I'm saying that I am. So I agree with that. What I was confused about when reading that proposal was like adding the header and making it the header. I'd much rather just do what you, and this is what I was going to suggest, but you beat me to it, like using a JWT token to put the signature inside of the JWT token, because we can
Yeah,
put anything in the JWT.
yeah, but I don't really think it makes sense because the idea of JWT is that you have this structure that it stores, and you sign this structure, you send this as a token encoded with a special format, and then on the receiver side, you decode this, you get the structure, and you need to verify the signature. And for that, normally you should have in advance configured URL where you can get the public key from. In our case, we would not request the public key through network, we would store it in the database. And with that, we would need to generate the JWT, and then still we need to send the request that we have. Because we want to send the, for example, the get me job request, which in our case sends the
Give me 2 seconds because my cat is going crazy. He needs to go out.
No problem. So
sorry about that.
So we still need to send a normal payload because, for example, we get the job request, we send the metadata of the runner, the architecture, CPU, the OS, and features used, and things like that. So we would need to send this payload, and separately we would need to generate JWT token that we would send. I don't say it's bad. Maybe you could even convince me to do this. I'm just thinking if you couldn't do all at once. The problem with JWT is also that the standards specify that you have expiration time. And if we would not specify the expiration time, we can't really talk about JWT. We could use the format and say this is a JWT-like token, but it would not be a real JWT.
But the signature.
Yeah,
Go
it
ahead,
also
sorry.
doesn't. It also doesn't it would be not usable in any other places, because only these few endpoints on the GitLab API side would have the public key, would know how to verify this. Going with the standard procedure, like sharing somewhere the public key on the runner side, then we are breaking the rule of it's runner that always talk to the GitLab, and that we store the authentication part on the GitLab side. So we could use JWT as a form of the token. We have libraries for this. We would not need to just reintroduce this from scratch. But then we still need to send the same things. We need to send at least the runner ID, or use the key ID or fingerprint, or however we will name it, to identify the runner on the GitLab side.
Yeah, what I was thinking, like, it's still a hazy, like, cloudy idea from my end. Like, that's why I'm not like pushing hard or anything. But what I was thinking is, we have a JWT token which has all the information, right? Like previously, what I used JWT token is to see if it's an admin, what roles the user has, and so on and so forth, right? And we can use it for the same thing. We inside of the JWT, we have the signature from the private key, decode that, and like say, hey, we have that. So it would be much like, it would be, how to say it, we don't create our own specification of a header. It needs to be this way. We have to document it both on the Rails and on the runner. And if something changed, like we just have a specification, which is the JWT specification, and we follow that. But I think these are implementation details. The big idea is still like the main idea, what you said with the public and private key. I don't have any objections to it.
Yeah, I think you're right with the using just JWT as a format, as a standard. Like, I must agree. I think that at the end we would just end with the same, but we would encode it by hand. Like, JWT gives you these different ways how you want to produce the signature with all of the algorithms, but at the end we are interested in sending the runner identification, the key identification. These two can be separated. It can be only the key identification, because we want to have unique key pair for each of the registered runners, and a signature. And then we can use a library on the runner side. We can use a library on the GitLab Rails side to just verify this, and then pull the ID from the message. So yeah, I think this is a detail, but this is a good idea to try use JWT for this. It's just like, when we will introduce this, we need to make it very clear that this is for this specific case of these few API endpoints, because from what I see, when people see JWT, it's like, oh, so I have the universal token that I can integrate with anything. Not in this case, because you will not have the public key to check it, because normally you would have API endpoint to get the public keys.
Well, the request will be accepted. We just won't accept the signature because the signature is invalid.
Yeah. So yeah, this is the rough idea, and again, the implementation would look like with the replacement for the registration token. So we need to introduce a new optional way to authenticate the 3 API endpoints, 4 if you want to add the rotation thing. On the GitLab side, we need to add a new code on the runner side, and then at the registration moment, you would decide we would decide which method to use, or we could do what we did many times in past year or two. In the runner version, let's say in the GitLab version 13.5, we introduced the changed APIs. So GitLab is ready. And in runner version 13.6, we switched to the new method. So every new runner registered, starting with 13.6, just uses the new method. Like, and the requirement is that if you want to use runner 13.6, you need to have at least GitLab 13.5, which is exactly what we did with the merge request ref specs. If you want to use pipelines for merge requests, or even more, because now this is the default. If you want to use GitLab version 12.1 to something like that, then you have a minimal required version of runner that you need to have,
yeah,
or something like that. So again, we have a good reason to force people to upgrade the runners, but we give them better security, a better flexibility as a replacement, and then we would just start in one of the versions. We would drop the previous one. We would have the new one. The only thing that we need to think about is how to transition the existing registrations. Because if we will just drop the current behavior from the runner, then if you will update the runner version, you are locked because you have token that is unusable on the runner side. So we should probably do this in steps, and in one version introduce a new way and switch registration to start registering new runners with the new private keys instead of the tokens. In the next version of the runner, we should add something that after starting the runner would iterate over all entries, generate the private keys, communicate with the API using the old registration method, and rotate the tokens. So the new API endpoint that we want to introduce for tokens rotation, for keys rotation, should support the old API authentication method. And then in version, and here we could say in version 14.0, we totally removed the legacy one. So it's like with many major updates of GitLab in the past. If you wanted to switch from 7x to 8x, you first needed to update to the last one from the 7x because it was preparing some stuff. Then you needed to switch to 8.0, and then you could upgrade it, skipping some of the versions. So we would have the requirement here that if you are on 12.1 and now you want to install 14.0, you need to install at least 13.11, let's say. I don't know what will be the last one. So this will do the magic to change the tokens to generated keys. And then with 14.0, we just drop the old support and we never talk about runner tokens again.
I don't have any questions or objections regarding that, so.
Okay, so the last part is the CI job token. The one that I have the biggest problem with, because this is literally the token that gives you the most permissions and the most possibilities, because getting your hands on the registration token or on the runner token is just half of the way, because you can try to act as the runner. But what you really want to do is that you want to get this job token, because if you have the job token, then you can do magic. And how the job token works like now. Job token is created uniquely for each job that is started on gitlab.com. It's stored in the CI builds database in the job record, encrypted, of course. And it's allowed in few parts of GitLab. It's not allowed to do everything. Like you can clone Git sources from Git repository from Git with it. You can pull or push registry images. You can download, upload the all new packaging stuff that we are adding. I think soon you should be able to do the releases API.
You can already do it.
You can already do it. Okay,
Yeah,
so
we were just lazy to update our scripts to do so, but yeah.
Yeah, I knew that this is coming. I didn't know that it's already done. And there are few endpoints in the GitLab API that you can authenticate with this token, but not all of them. So I don't remember now which ones. This is in the documentations, but for example, I'm able to use API to, for example, create the release entry or update it. But if I would like to remove a user, it's impossible. From what I remember, the user API, the user management API to be precise, is not allowed to be used with the CI job token. The funny thing about CI job token is that when we detect that it is it, and we detect this by the username that is used with it, because if you want to use the job token, we usually need to also use the static GitLab-CI-token, I think, username. The token itself, I don't think we recognize the token itself as a job token. It doesn't work like the path where you just provide the token and nothing else. So the token, when we verify it, we also check if the job connected with the token is in the running state. If we will try to use this token before the job will be transitioned from pending to running, it will fail. If it will be used after it's transitioned from running to failed, succeeded, cancelled, it will also not work. So at this moment, it's I see three problems. It's hard to use it, hard to abuse it, because the scope, even if powerful, it's limited. You can do powerful things, but very small amount of them. It's short-living, as long as the job is living. So in some cases, it can even mean days, but we need it to be for now such long, because, for example, we want to push artifacts at the end of the job. So if it took a week and the user expects that this job will take a week, we need to have a valid token after the week when the artifacts will be uploaded. But at the very moment where the job is finished, the token is invalidated. So if it will be revealed, it's usable only as long as the job is running, and it's usable only as long as you want to use the scopes of this token, which unfortunately is quite big, because the job token impersonates the person that started the job. So the person who pushed the code, who started the job manually from the UI, defined the trigger or defined the pipeline schedule, or use now the multi-project pipelines and shield pipelines. So if I get my hands on valid job token, I can access every project, I can access every package, every release API, every Docker image, and few more things where the token is usable as the person who owns the job. So if for any reason the GitLab administrator started a CI job and this token was revealed, I have a full administrator powers available in this few places. So this is the problem, and I don't see a solution for it. I really don't see a solution for it, because in case of the registration token, it's not used in the job context. It's used only when you register the token, when you register a new runner. And if you have this token, of course, this creates some problems, but registering a new runner is a rare thing that you do. And usually you do this on machines that no one have access to. So it's really hard to reveal it. The same goes for the runner token. It's used only to 3 things, and for now the only way how you can abuse it is this security report that we got. So you can find the token with the API, and then you can unregister the runner that normally you would be not able to. But again, this is something that if we will make it present only on the runner where it's required, and it's required only there, then we limit the scope, and on the runner side we can start rotating it even every minute if you want. With the job token, the problem is that we don't have a secure place where we could, for example, regenerate the token so it's very short-living. The token, by its design, by its purpose, is available for the user script. So while we are masking it, so you can't just print it to the job trace, you can send it to any external service that you like to use. And if your network, or if your runner's network setup allows you to access internet, you can do whatever you want with this. And even if we would make this token valid for 5 seconds, we would need to find a way for this token to be refreshable from the job place, which already is a hard task in the architecture that we have. And then then you can write a script that will refresh it every 5 seconds, and every 5 seconds send it to your remote service that tries to abuse this token and do something wrong. So because the purpose of this token is that we give it to the user, to the script owner, so he can do some things with the code that are really required for different jobs. And at the moment when we give this token to the user, it's user's responsibility to make it secure. What we can do is what we did already. So we can do it masked. So it will be not revealed by stupid echo CI job token or using the CI debug trace. What we can do is that we can make it valid only when the job is running. So only when we want this token to be usable, because after the job is finished, we don't see a reason for this token to be usable anymore. But during this time, and it can be really, really long, the user can do anything with this. And I saw some discussions in the CI job JWT merge request. I think Kamil said that maybe we should switch to JWT to be used instead of the CI job token. Maybe I'm missing something here, but I really don't see a point, because it's still a token that the user have full power on, and it's even worse because by design the JWT token has a static expiration time. So if we set it to be expired in 1 hour and the job will be 5 hours long, when we want to upload the artifacts, it's not valid anymore. If we set it to 1 hour and the job fails immediately because Docker was not accessible, but the token was revealed, the job is not working and the token is valid for next 59 minutes. So I really don't see a good replacement for the CI job token. What we could do probably, and maybe this is how the JWT could be usable, is introducing a concept of scopes. So then we could allow the user to, on the job level, define what scope the CI job token should have, and artifacts access would be set automatically if we have artifacts supported for this job. So we could make it just out of the scope for the user. The same goes for the Git sources. If we have any of the Git strategy or Git submodule strategy or Git LFS strategy defined, then we set the scope. If we set the strategy to known, then we can disable it. But for all other usages, it would be up to the user to define what scopes we would like to enable, or maybe what scopes we would like to disable to make it easier and compatible with what we have now. So then if you know that you will use the token only to pull the sources, upload the artifacts, and in the meanwhile create a release, then in the GitLab CI file, in the job definition, we have a new section like CI job token scopes, and we leave here release API. And if this is provided, then we limit the scope of the token to what the user set, plus artifacts repository, depending what is the job definition. And then if such token would be revealed by mistake or by purpose, the abuser could use only the releases API. It could not access, for example, the packages, not update any new packages. We could even try to introduce a scopes like supporting that the normal git fetch, git clone is required if you want to execute the job, but we could allow the user to say, okay, this job is not using any other projects, so please don't allow it to pull any other repositories than what the job needs, and have a scope for this. So this is how we could secure it a little. For that, JWT would make sense, because then we have this nice structure which we don't need to reinvent. It could be generated on the GitLab side and then verified on the GitLab side. So there is nothing on the runner side that needs to be done. We just need to switch all usages of the CI job token to the CI job JWT. But this is everything that I can imagine right now. Okay, I again talked too much. Time for you to say something.
Yeah, I don't have much to say. Like you pointed out everything, like the difficult part of removing it. I was gonna suggest the scoping thing, like we remove the scope. We look at what the user actually needs, and we scope the CI job token to what the user needs. And even for the artifacts and cache, not cache. For the artifacts and for the cloning, maybe instead we can instead of using the CI, like I haven't thought through, right? Instead of using the CI job token, we create a new token with this private key that we have, and have the runner token generated at that time, specific for one request, only a one-shot request. As soon as we use it once, it's invalidated immediately. But I know there are some issues that the benefit of CI job token is we get the user's permission out and
Yes.
the way, not the runner's permission.
Yes. And the artifacts and Git requests are then done in the scope of the job. If we would like to reuse the runner token here, runner private key, then we would make it in the scope of the runner. So if we would send information about the job, it's quite wider access.
Yeah, yeah.
And we would need to still try to limit it to the job scope. So using the job token, whatever we will finally end with, it's just easier because we want it to be limited to this job. What we don't have now and could be done is the scoping. So we can allow the user to disable everything that is not needed because I don't want a random job to play with my packages that I'm, for example, pushing manually. Yep. And I don't want any job to push this because then this will be revealed and someone will push malware to my packages repository that I say it's secure and always trust.
Yep. Sorry.
No, I have the same. I fully understand this.
Yeah, I would say scoping would be the best thing we can do on that. And maybe we don't get a lot of, like we do get some benefit, but it will get very complex doing dynamic scoping, right, on a token. So maybe that would be kind of the last step to do, as you mentioned. Like right now we can leave it as it is, and then we can revisit it later on.
Yeah, and in fact now I think I see what the team was complaining about in the issue, because he pointed that there are some endpoints that are available with the token, some endpoints that are not available. And I was focused on the fact that we want not to make it available for a lot of API because we really need it in some of them. But if we would introduce scoping, then we could try to find a way to allow the token to be used for any API that we want to have. Because for now, it maybe doesn't make sense to give access to the job to manage the users through the API, but it may be that the user have such need. And now they need to reinvent everything and do some hacky, fancy things to manage users from the CI job. While we could say, okay, so now we give you a mechanism where you can say, I want to allow this job to have access to the user's management API. And now with this JWT token, you're able to do whatever you want. It's big power, big responsibility, but it's up to you. It's not enabled by default, but you have such option. And then we could start, if we would think a good design for this, we could make it open for extensions in the future. Like whatever API we will create in the future, it's up to the user to define that it wants to use it, and we don't need to update the mechanism. It just the scopes, and it's automatically resolved on the API and authenticated.
What you are describing at the end of the day is RBAC, right? Like having a role-based access control.
Something like that. Like this is how it now works with Vault, and I'm really impressed how nice it works. We provide a set of claims, and then in the Vault policy, we can, and Vault policy and Vault role for the authentication, we can use all of the claims and do any fancy stuff that we want to authenticate this. Here, we would just need to make some of the claims dynamically created by the user, and we would need to require the user to create it in the way that it will be next understood by the API, because in Vault, it's you who create the structure of secrets and the policy. Here, we define the structure of API, and then you would need to align with the structure, with the way how we allow you to authenticate this request. But the claims providing could be done in elastic way.
Yep.
It's a little bit more complex probably with the GraphQL API, but I think it could be extended in the future also for this. And this could give us really, really, really nice possibilities.
I agree.
Oh, okay. So very long call. We've made all other people enough boards to leave us here this time. But they can always rewatch the recording.
Yeah, I'll try to upload it tomorrow probably.
Okay. Okay, so Steve, thank you very much for proposing this call and for
No worries. Thank you for spending so much time thinking about really hard problems the runner has.
Okay, so I think we can switch the recording off and see you.